Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today we are going through Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's first Minnesota Vikings draft class. It was an interesting class for sure. A lot of movement for the first year GM. A lot of kind of unexpected movement as well, with him trading twice within the division, which has a mixed reception among fans for sure. There's some ups and downs here for sure. I think there's a lot to kind of go over, but ultimately we're not going to know a whole lot about these guys for several years. So, this is not a jump to conclusions podcast. I don't think we've ever been those two guys before, and I don't expect us to be those guys here today. But there are definitely some things that we can kind of jump into here and take a deeper look at some techniques. I think we learned a lot about Kwesi as well in terms of what he's looking for. The types of players that he's going to target and the type of movement that he's going to do within a draft. There was definitely some Rick Spielman tendencies that I think a lot of you actually pointed out throughout the draft. But ultimately, it seems to me, this is kind of my overarching theme here throughout this entire show, is that Kwesi's draft style is that the entire draft is like you need to valuing each individual move is going to get you nowhere because each move kind of connects within the next one, and you have to look at the full scope before you start grading the overall assignment of what he tried to do this past weekend here. So we'll go through the majority of these picks here, talk about their immediate impact, their long-term impact, and kind of how the Vikings were able to acquire some of these players, the maneuvers that Kwesi made. But that'll be today's show. So draft season is finally over. That's something in and of itself.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump into the first round pick here with Lewis Cine, the safety out of Georgia. I don't think, and Drew and I were just kind of briefly chatting about this before the show here, that I don't think either of us were really thinking like this guy was even on the Vikings' radar, particularly in the first round. The Vikings ultimately moved back from the number 12 spot. They moved down to 32, pick up a couple of picks in the process, swap second rounders, and add a third. And this is one of those moves where it's just going to be inherently polarizing because first and foremost, it's different, right? And that's something that, members on our group at Climbing the Pocket actually brought up is that as soon as your new GM starts doing something different from your old GM, it feels a little bit fishy. And then as soon as you start trading within the division, you start wondering, okay, does he still think he's in Cleveland? So there's a lot of question marks there. But I guess what did you think, first and foremost, of the move itself to drop down to 32 and the value that the Vikings acquired in the process?
Yeah, I mean, the initial reaction for me, and I still kind of feel this way, is there had to have been a better move in terms of value retained to move out of 12 if that's what they desired at that moment. I just can't imagine, giving up 49 as well, in addition to giving up 12 to get, 32 and then 56 and another 66 maybe, whatever it was. I can't imagine that was the best offer out there. And I hope they didn't go through the process and think, well, and hypothetically, if that was the only offer, that they felt like they had to accept it, right? Because it was the only one. Again, we don't know all the details. We never will. But at first glance, it doesn't seem like it was the right move in terms of the value received for the 12th overall pick. You're moving down 20 spots in the first round. Moving down 20 spots in the first round is not the same as moving down 20 spots in the 5th round. Right. And I kind of think that might be a little bit of the, evaluation process there. It seemed like they were using. But with that said, the player Cine, like you said, not one I had on my radar, not one that a lot of people had on the radar for the Vikings, but he seems to be a gamer, seems to be something that the Vikings can use defensively. And I look at, what the Vikings now have on the roster. They have Harrison Smith, obviously, you have Lewis Cine, and you have Cam Bynum, and you have the potential to use 3 safeties. And I don't know, what if that was in the cards for the Vikings, if that was something that, the coaching staff at Donatel and maybe Kwesi talked about, if the safety's there that we like, we're going to take him and we could go 3 safeties. I hope that was part of the equation because I like Cam Bynum. I think he should be involved. And I think you had the potential. There's some really unique stuff, but Seen can play all three levels. He's kind of a light Harrison Smith in that way. It also does have that hard hitting kind of intimidating factor about him too. So really good player. I question some of the positional value aspect at safety, and I also question kind of the trade itself and what the Vikings got in return. But the player himself, Luis Cine, is he seems like a solid player. I feel like a pretty high floor too for his NFL career.
Absolutely. So the player itself, I don't have any debate on. I like Luis Cine. I think he's a really nice player. I like his versatility as a safety. He's basically a linebacker safety. You know, he's kind of got some Budda Baker to him. He's kind of got some Harrison Smith to him. Obviously, the draft profile in terms of his athleticism scores, they match up fairly, very close to what Harrison Smith put up at the combine. What was that, back in 2012 or whenever that was? My God, a long time ago. And so you get a nice player. I don't have a problem with the pick. My problem lies, or it's not really necessarily a problem. It's more like the part where I'm skeptical of is the move itself, like Drew was saying. Anytime you move down 20 spots at all, I think it's kind of like you turn your head, you do the Bruce Arians gif, and you're like, what just happened? 20 spots down, and you end up moving up. What was it? 12 spots in the second round to get a higher second round pick, which you ultimately flipped to the Packers, and you end up getting a third round pick in addition to that. So this was funny because even the analytics debated this one with some value schemes saying this was a great move, some value schemes saying that it was kind of a no move with the Vikings maybe punching up a little bit. And there were also a couple of them too that said that Detroit fleeced the Vikings. So there's a debate within the analytics community, which is not normally something that we see. And now I'm sure that, there's going to be people saying that, well, some of those systems are outdated. Some of them are more, contemporary to, football now. And that's all true. But the fact that there was an internal debate in that of itself is interesting. Then you look at the film people too, or the people who are valuing less on the side of let's try to get this down to one number and figure out a value for it. And they're valuing more the player and kind of the potential for that player and how that player can be added to your roster immediately and have some type of an impact both immediately and in the future. And that crowd is pissed as well because they wanted Kyle Hamilton. And it makes no sense in theory, right? If you're sitting at 12, why would you move up 12 spots in the second round and add a third round pick when you know you can get Kyle Hamilton to play next to Harrison Smith, who is pretty much by all accounts going to be the better safety? Again, remains to be seen. I'm not going to judge two players right now, but every scout's account had Kyle Hamilton as number one, and Luis Cine was as high as number two, but traditionally sitting there around number three on most prospect boards. So there's a question there, whether if you like Luis Cine and you think he's the best safety in your class, the fact that the market was dictating that Kyle Hamilton was number one in the class and that he has value in and of itself, being a top 5 overall prospect too, I agree with Drew in the sense that you should have gotten more value. You should have moved down to 23 or something like that. And then if you want to move down to 23, okay, cool. Then you move down to 32 after that, if you still think that you can get more value at that point in time. The point is that I'm making here is that, and I think it was Matt Fries from our team that made this point and did this very, very well, is that the market was basically saying, this is what this pick is worth. And the Vikings were like, all right, we'll take a little bit less than that. And that's not a savvy maneuver, in my opinion, regardless of whether or not you got the player that you wanted or not. The value for Cine at 32 is tremendous. The value for the trade itself is questionable, to say the least. And I have a lot of skepticism about that being the very first move that Kwesi made. And then you also have to throw in the fact that I feel like I'm screaming into a wall because no one seems to feel this way like I do, but I cannot believe that the Vikings are even thinking about trading within the division. Now, I understand the people saying, okay, well, if Detroit was going to move up to 12, they were going to move up to 13 anyways, right? They were going to find a new trade partner, and they were going to get up there anyways. I may as well get optimal value. The Detroit, with the Green Bay deal that we'll get to in a second here, that makes a little bit more sense for me. I can kind of get on board with that thinking because based off of the value the Vikings received in that move, that the Packers were they were starving, right? They needed to get a wide receiver.
Yeah, that one was, it seemed like they were the recipients of someone being desperate a little bit more there.
Right. But
This
not
one,
in the
it's
Detroit
just
deal.
the combination of the division plus, the value received for what you gave up. I mean, it didn't, something was a little off with all that whole trade, really, to me. And I don't know if I'll ever really get over it.
Especially with so many other teams moving up for the wide receiver position, right? Like ultimately Detroit takes Jameson Williams, right? He's got an injury history. It remains to be seen if he actually will ever reach his potential. I'm betting on, because the Vikings traded with Detroit, that he will reach that potential first and foremost. And second of all, why couldn't you have traded with someone else that also wanted a player? I mean, Chris Olave was taken right in that same range. Garrett Wilson slipped as well. I mean, I know a bunch of teams were trading up to get into that 8 to 14-ish range and moving around to get not just wide receivers but other positions as well. It just feels to me like the market did not dictate the result in this case, and that's why I'm not thrilled about the maneuver. The player, very nice, like Lewis Cine, like his future potential with the Vikings, like what Ed Donatel could potentially do with them. But you also are putting a lot of pressure on Ed Donatel to make sure that value is optimized now too, right? This is a player where if you're taking him just to be a safety, he might be a very good one, and that's just fine. But then the value doesn't meet in terms of positional value in my mind. Now, if you're taking him to be a safety, linebacker, off the edge threat, everything else that he did at Georgia, tackling menace, if you will, makes a little bit more sense to me. But that's on Ed Donatel, and that's something that I can't evaluate today. So a lot of moving parts there with kind of what happened. Ultimately, happy with the player, not happy with the maneuver. That's kind of where I land in that spot.
Yeah, I'm also hoping Harrison Smith kind of accepts the mentor role a little bit better than Ryan Tannehill, to kind of, teach Lewis Cine and help him mature into the NFL player, because I imagine that transition there in the next 2 to 3 years will have to happen, where Smith is no longer a Viking and Cine kind of takes over as the primary safety. So, but I mean, I kind of want to move on to the second pick here too, because
please do.
The Vikings and Clemson defensive backs have an interesting history. But I think, the Vikings fandom was kind of clamoring here for Booth all throughout kind of the end of that first round and into the early second round. And the way they were able to get him while still moving back again, kind of in a way, again, I'm still a little bit caught up with the idea of trading in the division, especially with a rival in the division, such as Green Bay.
Rival, yes.
The rival. But I think the Vikings got a really good end of this trade here. And I think Booth is one of those guys that a little bit of a sleeper at the position, and one that everybody wanted. And I think that's something to be excited about. And I think Kwesi, I don't want to say redeemed himself, right? But I think he took a step back in the right direction after what to me is still kind of a sketchy, questionable move in the first round.
Yeah. Andrew Booth, definitely a very nice player. The value on this deal considerably better, right? There's not as much debate, if any, in terms of what the Vikings were able to acquire to move back, 9 spots to select Andrew Booth at 42. So you get tremendous value at the player in Booth, who a lot of people, I believe ourselves included, actually debated this, taking in the top 20. Now, this is also a player that has an injury history, a very significant injury history at that, and he's not shy about it either. I mean, he got right on, Vikings Network, or whatever the Vikings.com website, whatever they call themselves, and essentially said, I haven't been healthy since I was in high school. And so, there's two sides to that, right? There's my goodness, I sure hope our training staff knows what they're doing. And then there's the other side of it where it's like, maybe this guy's potential is even higher than we initially even thought it would be, because he hasn't been healthy his entire adult life.
Which I like the high ceiling, low floor type of move there. I do. Because I think you get a tremendous value there. You see a guy slipping because of that injury history. Take that chance, because it's one that could pay off big time and really elevate this defense very quickly. If you can get a guy that's, turns into a kind of, intimidating shutdown corner, that suddenly transforms the entire defense. And I'm not saying that will happen with Booth, but I think, the number one hurdle there is injury history. And if he can stay healthy, I think that possibility becomes much more likely.
Yeah, If he's able to stay on the field, I think that there's a very good likelihood that he is starting for the Vikings for many years. This is my favorite. This is personally my favorite pick in the entire draft. I don't like, again, I'm going to say this again, and I'm not going to turn into a broken record here on the trading within the division, but I don't like trading within the division. I don't like trading with the Packers. That really pissed me off. I was not a fan of that move. I understand that it's kind of a double-sided thing. I think it was Arif Hassan that pointed out that if you're going to fleece anyone in a trade deal in terms of value, why not fleece your number one division rival? And I'm with that. I understand that point of view. I think I'm going to be stubborn on this one. That's really what it comes down to. I'm going to be stubborn on this, is because ultimately you gave the Packers what they needed. They needed a wide receiver.
You gave them what they wanted. Yeah. I mean, that's the problem, but that's the part I'm struggling with, is we are serving the Packers what they need and what they wanted. And kind of what we had been trolling them about for so many years is that they never grabbed a receiver. They never took that leap at the wide receiver position. Now they have. Now, here's the thing. In a year or two, we'll come back and look at this. And if it's, Laquan Treadwell 2.0, then that'll be great. And kudos to you, Kwesi, for the move, right? But it also could very quickly, veer the other way. And I imagine the Vikings front office could be easily regretting this in a big way if, is it Christian Watkins, I believe, is that his name? Watson. If he really turns into something special for Green Bay, which seems likely given their passing attack.
Yeah, I was going to say, remember who their quarterback is, right? Like Aaron Rodgers optimizes the potential of every wide receiver he's ever touched, right? I mean, Marquez Valdes-Scantling just signed a $10 million average annual salary. I don't think there's anyone in Vikings Nation who thought that he was a good wide receiver.
He runs in a straight line really fast.
Exactly.
That's about it.
And you got Devontae Adams getting the biggest contract of all time for the wide receiver position. I thought he was a really nice player coming out of Fresno State. I didn't think he was that good. And we're going to find out with both of those players. But my inclination is that the quarterback has a high influence on what these guys can do. So if you have talent, which Christian Watson does, in terms of being able to run routes, and in terms of being able to get open, in terms of straight line speed and change direction speed, which he has all those things, Aaron Rodgers can make you look pretty damn good. And that's a problem for me. So I won't harp on that too much. I know everyone's sick of hearing about that, but that's where I stand in that, is that I love the player that they got in Andrew Booth. And I do love the idea of Andrew Booth and Christian Watson being stuck together kind of forever, because they're going to be playing against each other, hopefully for a very long time.
That will be a fun matchup to watch, like on TV, head to, hopefully they're matched up like, right in front of each other, face to face.
And you will literally get snaps. To see who fleeced who throughout the life of this deal. So, I mean, we'll see. I'm skeptical again. So we're 2 for 2 in skepticism, which is not necessarily the best way to start off your career as a general manager. The only thing I will say is that Kwesi has 4 years, right? Like, it's not like the Wilfs are not going to fire this guy for doing something different. And I do appreciate that he is doing something a little bit different. There are just some little pieces of it where I would tweak it a bit. But there's also a reason I'm not a general manager. So, there's all of these different elements coming together. And I think it's very fair to be skeptical of how the Vikings got there. But if you look at the Vikings roster and you think about what they acquired with those first 2 picks, I think you can very comfortably say that they got better at their most, problematic area on their 53-man roster right now, increasing the viability of their defensive backs with Lewis Seen and Andrew.
And I kind of want to transition based on what you just said, right? Moving and improving on the defensive back spot. I know this is a little bit skipping around, but maybe we can kind of we can kind of go to what we think is maybe our favorite pick of the draft, at least maybe like favorite mid to late round pick. I know you said Booth was your favorite pick, but mine was a Caleb Evans, Missouri, in the 4th round. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. I'm trying to read it, the phonetic pronunciation, but I kind of like that in the sense, again, it's another kind of, to me, a high ceiling, maybe low floor, but high ceiling risk type of play. And I like that because he's a big corner. He's got the size. He's long. It's kind of a corner that Mike Zimmer would appreciate, honestly, those measurements. But another guy who, and here's the thing, if the cornerback position doesn't work, his career won't be over, because he's got the size and he can transition to safety, where he could also be of value. And that's what I like. Again, more versatility there on the defensive side. So he's physical. I think he kind of matches the attitude of what this defense appears to be molding into, is this kind of physical, like punch you in the mouth type of attitude that it seems to be like what the roster build is trying to showcase a little bit. And so I like that a lot. I think that's really good value there in the 4th round. And I think the Vikings could really benefit from kind of taking that chance there too. And so between Booth and Evans, I think the cornerback position could see a really nice uptick this year. Again, pending the health of Booth for sure, but then also the development of Evans. If done right, I think he could turn into a special player.
I mean, you know who Evans looks like, right? He looks just like Xavier Rhodes when he came out of Florida State in terms of like his physical ability. Now, did it take Xavier Rhodes a little bit of time to figure it out? Yeah. And is he on the back end of his career now and kind of aging quicker than maybe expected? Yeah, that too. So it's not a one-to-one comparison by any means, but if you look at the physical frame, the athletic traits, there's some comparable numbers there. And especially to get a guy like that in the 4th round. You know, I watched some tape on this guy because, first of all, I love cornerback, the position itself, and it's the easiest thing for me to watch on film without feeling like I'm doing work, right? And Evans has very good instincts around the football once it gets to the catch point as well, which is something you can teach it, right? But the level of instincts and the way to turn around and find the football and slap it out of the wide receiver's hands or get your hands up into a position where they can't catch it at all, that's not really something you can teach. You can hope to try, but it's something that's based.
You get a big head start if you can do that naturally.
Right.
And
absolutely.
So he's got like he's raw to a degree, right? You have to be if you're not. You got his measurables and you're in the 4th round. But I think there's seriously some potential there that if he can fine tune a few things, like he could turn into a really nice starting player. And I can very much see a scenario where it's Booth and Evans kind of as that 1-2 punch at corner for several years. So I'm excited to watch him in camp, you know, go up against Jefferson and Thielen and these guys that are savvy and quick and know how to win at the line, like how he can quickly learn from them, because that will be fun to watch.
Absolutely. I really like that pick as well. I think that would probably qualify as my favorite mid-round selection. The other ones that I really liked are honestly the ones that are right around him. I think that Kwesi did a really good job from about the 3rd round through about the 5th round. And then, of course, once you get into the 6th and the 7th, it's kind of just you're throwing lotto tickets. Throwing darts at a board, right? And it's not as – it's you could say A or F, whatever, but I don't think anyone really knows. But in that 3rd to 5th round range, I mean, you get Brian Samoa as well, the linebacker from Oklahoma.
4, 5, 6, 40.
Oh, yeah. Undersized, and Kwesi talked about this. This is one thing I really did appreciate about Kwesi's draft is that he was extremely transparent both immediately after and then on the radio the following week with why he made selections and the kind of the usage for these players, whereas Mike Zimmer was and Rick Spielman were a little bit more tight-lipped and you didn't really get to understand what they were even trying to do in the first place. Brian Asamoah is an undersized linebacker. That's the first thing that everyone is going to point out when they talk about this guy. But Kwesi said, well, yeah, I'm aware that he's small, and I'm aware that his build doesn't necessarily fill out this in the way that you typically would want for an interior linebacker or a guy, even necessarily an outside linebacker in a 3-4 scheme. But you don't necessarily see it on tape. And if you watch I think you got to watch enough film of this guy to really get a good feel for what that means, because it's not just, you can watch 3 plays and be like, oh yeah, he plays bigger than his size, whatever. You need to watch enough film to really see it be consistent. But I think there's something to that opinion that Kwesi has, and that this is a very athletic guy, that the fact that he is, small, and I say that in quotes because he's 6'1", 228, right?
Yeah.
And he's 6'3", 245, or 6'3", 285, like Brandon Spikes or something like that. But this is a different league. He's got to be able to trail tight ends. He's to some degree got to be able to bracket slot receivers. That size could be a good thing depending on what Ed Donatel likes to do here or wants to do with this player. So there's a very real chance that he provides value beyond just what linebacker says or what you think for in terms of conventional wisdom on what a linebacker should look like. And so I like this pick. I'm open-minded with this pick. And I will say he's also very, very successful at a highly touted program, a highly successful program for multiple years. And he's got the leadership traits, the characteristics in terms of, being a high character guy, which is something that we can't quantify and really don't know the answer to, but everything suggests that he is in that space. So I'm a fan of this pick. That was one of my favorites as well. And the one directly underneath the Caleb Evans as well, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, probably blowing that name, but I'm going to blow it every time I try to say it on this show. The Golden Gopher. Great PR move for your Vikings after what they did in the second round with Ed Ingram. And I also like the potential fit as well. You need someone that can play 5 technique in a 3-4 defense, or at least someone that can rotate in. So I think that's a good value selection in the 5th round as a guy that could potentially get some reps as a rookie.
Yeah, I was going to mention him too. It seems like, has the build and the traits too, that he can go probably inside or outside too on the line. Right. Especially like a pass rushing downs, like they could get really creative with. You remember what that playoff game against the Saints when they brought inside, they brought Hunter and Griffin inside, and then they had, stuff like that. If Donatell sees an opportunity there, I think he's one of those guys that you can get flexible with and go either way. So I like that a lot too. Again, another one of those that I think has maybe a lower floor and higher ceiling, but again, I'm all for those types of picks because at this point in the draft, that's what you should be aiming for.
Right. Once you get into that mid round, that day 3 area, or that late day 2, you're looking for players who have 1 or 2 traits, and then maybe another trait or 2 that you can develop. You can't teach size, so you're definitely getting that with a Tomowo or
what is he, 6'5", I don't remember the measurements, but big dude.
Too big for, like if I was standing next to him, he'd make me look small. He's 6'6", 285. Big boy, right? So you can't teach that in and of itself. And then there's the technique, the Big Ten playing within, against Wisconsin offensive linemen, Michigan offensive linemen, Iowa, the Cornhuskers, all those guys. You get good volume in terms of your level of experience as well against quality competition. So I like all of those things. And are there things that he needs to work on? Absolutely. He wouldn't be a 5th round pick if there were. But I think there's developmental traits there. You got a good body type there. And you could say the same thing about a Caleb Evans as well, in terms of you got some things that you can't teach with these guys, and you got some things that you feel like you can teach. And that's what you're aiming for in that middle to late round of the draft. So honestly, I think from Brian Asamoah, Caleb Evans, Kwesi, and then moving on to Tai Chandler as well, the running back out of North Carolina, that's 4 quality selections in a row in terms of guys who may not ever be starters at any point in their entire career, but you will get snaps from each of these guys, and you'll probably get snaps from them all immediately. And that in and of itself, I feel like is a win.
And you can envision them playing a sizable role on like a playoff team or a contending team, and that ultimately is what you're trying to build here, right? And I think you certainly have hit that at least with these guys. So I'm excited. I overall am pleased with what Kwesi did. Don't agree with everything. I certainly don't agree with all of the method of which he was able to get these guys right. But the actual players, the actual prospects that he selected and brought onto the team, overall, you can't be upset about it. I think there's probably a missed opportunity there with maybe earlier in the 1st round grabbing a guy. I think we don't know what the trade discussions were like. Right. Maybe getting a more of a blue chip prospect compared to Lewis Seen, but the actual quality and quantity of the players brought in has to be. I think it brings some more optimism to Vikings fandom here over the summer.
Yeah, I definitely have what I'm coining as skeptical optimism, where there's a lot of questions that I have. We haven't even talked about Ed Ingram, and really I don't want to get into that. I'm sure you guys have heard about that plenty, but I'm skeptical of like that move in and of itself. That player to me shouldn't have been on any draft board. It probably wasn't. So why would you even take him in the 2nd round? And let alone, why would you bring a player with that level of character to this organization, which I think is a questionable move from your first-year GM as well. That being said, everything else that's done around that pick, basically, I find positives in, right? I would have loved to use that pick for something different, especially in the second round. I don't like that because that's the value that you got from the Packers, right? I don't like that value. But the mid-round stuff to me kind of outweighs the question marks that you have about the other players in this group. And if you can get one or two spot starters and maybe two starters from this draft class, that feels like an overall win to me. And I think that you're going to get two starters for sure. And Lewis, this would be like kind of my bold prediction, like my, I don't really know anything, but like, here's what my first look at this class thinks. I think you're going to get two starters in Lewis Cine and Andrew Booth. I think you're going to get a rotational starter, or a guy that's going to give you a high number of snaps in Brian Asamoah. I don't know what that's going to look like, whether he's playing true linebacker or something different within that 3-4 scheme that Donatel's going to be running. I think that you're going to get good quality reps and possibly rotational snaps from Caleb Evans, with the potential to maybe see him as a starter or a spot starter at the very least by the time we get to about the end of his rookie contract. And I think Tai Chandler and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, both of those guys are going to be immediate impact players in terms of what they're able to do as rookies. And then you think about Alexander Madison's contract expiring and the value that Tai Chandler brings with Dalvin Cook being on the roster, a potential guy that you might be reviewing his contract in the future too. I like the idea of taking a bunch of running backs or taking a running back late in the 5th, 6th, 7th round.
That's when you should be drafting them anyway, I think.
Yes, take that swing right there, and especially with a guy that has a full bill of skills, right? I mean, this is a guy that can catch passes out of the backfield. It's a guy that can run the football as well. I think there's very real potential to get something out of him as well. So I just listed off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players from this class, and who knows about Vidarian Lowe, who's got unbelievable character out of Illinois, Jalen Naylor, who's incredibly fast and has some skills that you could potentially mold, and then Nick Muse. I mean, all of these players have at least one skill, and that's not necessarily enough at the NFL level, but they have one skill where you're like, okay, maybe with this guy, and that's what you want to do. So overall, I mean, I think this is like a B draft. Nothing jumps off the page at me, but we might look back at a couple of years and be like, hey, there's a couple long-term starters from this group.
Yeah, it's nothing magical or no wizardry done here to land these guys, but I think there's a lot of positives. There's more positives than negatives for sure. So I think, I think Kwesi passed his first test, if you will, at least from the first impression. Right now, a lot of people are going to argue doing a draft grades segment or write up or however you consume post draft content is silly anyway, because you can look back and see, how people thought about Patrick Mahomes' pick, or you name the player, you name the pick. There's probably someone that doubted it immediately. So, but overall, I think there's things to be skeptical about, but it seems like the players brought in are a solid bunch.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see Lewis Cine week 1. And another thing that I appreciated too is someone asked, I'm trying to remember who it was. It wasn't Jamal Stevenson. It was someone else within the kind of the director of scouting role. They said, what do you expect from Andrew Booth this year? Like, do you think that he can start? And the answer wasn't yes or no. It's up to him if he can be healthy. So this regime does not care about your status as a rookie. They care about what you're able to do on the field and if you're able to be on the field in the first place. So I don't think we're going to have any Stephon Diggs situation where the guy should have been starting week 1, or Justin Jefferson even more so. I don't think we're going to see that in this regime with Kevin O'Connell. They're going to start the best player regardless of who you are. And that means that's more opportunity and gives, I guess, more motivation, in my mind at least, for these young players to come in and make some level of an immediate impact. So I'm overall satisfied with this draft class. That's kind of what I feel. It's satisfied. I'm not ecstatic. There's not one player that I truly love. I do really like Andrew Booth, but ultimately I think we'll see what happens. And how
I will say they avoided the what the hell was that pick? Like, Willie Beavers back in the day when he was completely off all the draft boards and the Vikings go 4th round. And, things like that, or more it's boringer. Like, it doesn't seem like the Vikings have made that move this year. So a lot of good. I think reason for optimism.
Absolutely. All right. So I believe that about encompasses all of these picks here within about 45 minutes, which is what we were going for here today. So that concludes our draft coverage, if you want to call it that. This show is not very focused on the draft, as you've noticed. but we got through it here, and we're happy to be through it. And now we get to look forward to the summer here, what the Vikings are going to be doing in the immediate future, how these guys all factor in with their new environment, and a way that the team decides to build the roster post draft. We've already seen, for example, Tyrann Mathieu signing with the New Orleans Saints. There's still some moves to be made out there. There's still some nice players out there as well to fill some of these potential holes that you may see. And there are some other questions too. Like, for example, Garrett Bradbury, are you going to be the starter at center? Because it's starting to look that way. So we'll discuss all that kind of stuff throughout the summer, figure out what anything else that comes up, and we'll deal with it at that point in time. But we appreciate you guys listening to us. Is there anything that we did not touch on here today that you want to get out of the way before I lead us out?
I don't think so. It's that, but like you said, we're wrapped up with draft season now. We're getting closer to actual football again, which is fun.
Yeah, always the best feeling in the world the closer you get to football season. And by the way, thank you to anyone that did turn out at the brewery this past weekend and hung out with our guys that were there, or any of you that watched the live draft show that everyone from our team for the most part participated in. Dave did a great job producing that. I watched some piece of it. I couldn't obviously be on it because of the other commitments that I have, but I think that they put together a really nice product, and I hope that you guys enjoyed that with the rest of the Climb in the Pocket team. I thought they did a great job. So thank you guys for watching that. And if you want to find us on the show, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, wherever else you listen to your podcast, we are available there. Daily Norseman as well. And then, of course, if you want to watch us on YouTube, you certainly have that luxury. We do allow for you to do that. Although I will say you're not going to get any cool cosmetics or anything like that. That's going to, lead you away from the audio for sure. So thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you next week.